just I will not read the bio, because otherwise the 15 minutes will go for that. So we have Dr. Dashdorj from Mongolia. Is a medical doctor, founder of the Njouom Foundation, that is doing a wonderful job on all liver diseases and hepatitis and Delta in Mongolia. We have Stefan Urban, that does not need any introduction. Next slide, please. We have Richard Njouom from Cameroon, Institut Pasteur in Cameroon. That is a virologist and engaged in African setting. We have Anna Kramvis, that we all know from South Africa. She's an expert on viral hepatitis, molecular virology, and molecular epidemiology. And finally, we have Manal from Egypt, that is well known to all of us for all her work on chronic hepatitis, especially in the setting of pediatric patients. And let's go for it. Maura, you had some questions for the panel. You can go.
Yeah, we can. I think the issue of trying to understand the main problem, the challenges that different country faces in screening. We heard about the reflex screening, et cetera, and the new guideline that we have now. But we have the opportunity now to ask representative from Africa and Mongolia. I would start with them actually to give a very short, say some sentencing, just 1 2 sentences really, making the point of the situation in Mongolia and different region of Africa. Africa is a huge country, obviously, so it would be very important. Maybe Dr. Dashdorj, you can start. We know that Mongolia has a very high prevalence of HDV, and maybe tell us a little bit the screening situation and so on, and testing, what's going on there.
Thank you for the introduction. And we have, as you all just stated, we have a huge burden of the disease. So hepatitis B has been screened in a wide range of population. So we have screened 1.1 million people already. The target is 2.2. And out of 1.1 million people, we have identified almost, the exact numbers are, I think, 98,000 people with HbA1c positivity. According to the guideline, we are actually supposed to reflex test them for anti-Delta. But the problem with not having a lot of different qualified testing, also the issue of the funding. So we are actually not doing that from the health insurance fund. So the patients are actually paying out of pocket, getting it tested, and a lot of them actually get tested. And one of the issue, as indicated shown by the Fabian's presentation, that we have different testing results coming out, different results, and that patients are actually getting quite confused. Do they have the disease, not have the disease? And then, of course, Delta is not making things easy. So we also need to do the HDV RNA, and then RNA being tested in different labs gives different results, etc. So there's a lot of unknowns and a lot of, so for example, one of the issue really with the HDV RNA testing is one is the expense, and then the other is health insurance fund is planning to subsidize the testing, but it's been almost now 3.5 years. We've been still discussing because authorities does not know which one would be the right one to choose. So the robogene is incredibly high, so we cannot afford it. So a lot of the hospitals are using in-house testing. At least the good things that we are now, most of the specialized clinics are using the WHO standards. So this is getting a little bit better. But still, these are the problems that patients are facing, and then clinicians are also not really having good handle on which one you need to take it as a diagnostic test, which one how many times you have to repeat it, how long do you have to wait, and what kind of the patients you have to see them more often, etc. So all of that so much depends on the diagnostics. So I think it's very important, especially the multiplex testing like HbA1c and Delta, if they can actually screened in one go, then the cost actually go down a lot, because HBsAg tested and then comes back again, another appointment, another time of blood draw, etc. It gets quite costly. So this is the situation in Mongolia.
And to be exact, on the viremia level is one thing, but that's what we will come back to the question also, if maybe a rapid test might also facilitate at least the first step of screening, and then, of course, move on. Maybe can Stefan at the end add something in this direction. But perhaps we move on to Africa. Richard Njouom, would you like to start and make a little bit a point of the situation? Or Anna?
Okay, I think
Richard's muted. Richard?
Yes.
Otherwise, Anna, please go ahead.
Okay, all right. Thank you for the opportunity. Well, for Africa, I think at least for sub-Saharan Africa, what we can say is there's a paucity of data. Here in South Africa, we say that there's no HDV circulating, but I know anecdotally that there is. We have no facilities for testing whatsoever. All the facilities are in research institutes, in-house PCR, and there's one particular institute that's doing anti-HDV. So we don't screen for HDV. We've just had a number of cases where the clinicians felt that we needed to screen, and we helped out as a research facility to look for RT-PCR. The last study that was done in South Africa for HDV was done 25 years ago, 1997. So there's definitely a need for more research. We're also seeing a lot of immigration from the north of Africa, where there is more HDV coming into South Africa. So we're seeing movement of HDV in the country, but of course, we've either had to do it in-house here or send the samples out to Europe for testing. So there's definitely a need for data. We've also got the HIV context, which is something very important that we need to be aware of, because the natural history might differ with the HIV co-infection, and of course the response to treatment would also differ in the context. And it's also important that any new drugs or any new antiviral agents that are developed are trialed in Africa. We have a paucity of clinical trials in Africa. I think in total, just for HBV, we've had 48 clinical trials in all the years on the continent. And that's very low, considering that we have the highest prevalence. It's the only region of the world where HBV is still hyperendemic. And of course, we have the highest incidence of hepatocellular carcinoma. So this is what I have to say. And I think Richard will back me. I think from the Cameroon as well.
Yeah, thank you. You made a very clear point. And
very
yes,
strong.
please, Richard.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks for the invitations. Yes, I'm Richard Njouom from Cameroon. And regarding the HDV infections, Central Africa is as an epicenter of the HDV infection, because we see that we have about 5% of HBV infected people who are HDV positive. And we have conducted, let's say 10 years ago, a demographic health survey in Cameroon, where about 15,000 people were tested, and around 10% were HBV positive. And among those 10% HBV positive, 11% were HGV positive. And there is a very high heterogeneity on HDV prevalence regarding the region where people are living. But we have about 50%, say 50% of people living in the forest, the south and the eastern region of Cameroon. The vegetation there is the forest, and about 50%, one over 2% of HGV are HGV infected. So the challenge that we have is that the HGV diagnostics are not conducted in routine activities. And we have only, let's say, HB antibody testing, but not the RNA, because most of the samples that are positive are, let's say, sent to our reference lab in Paris. And a big challenge now is to see how we can, let's say, set up in Cameroon the HDV RNA testing, because people need it, and it's very expensive. And I know that because of this shortage of, or this lack of screening in the country, the epidemic is underestimated, very underestimated, because more about, let's say, 50% of the people are not aware about their systems. So I think that the big challenge is how to decentralize, how to introduce HDV rapid tests, because we don't have it. There is no, most of the HDV rapid testing, even the antibody testing, are not available in our country. So thank you very much. That's what I want to say for a moment.
Thank you very much. It was a clear point you made. Maybe we briefly move to the north of Africa. Manal, if you are there and listening,
yeah,
the situation might be a little bit different.
Yeah, I think we have almost the same problem, because we do not test for Delta routinely unless it's requested by the physician. If you see something that might indicate testing for Delta, but we do not test for it routinely. Some of the physicians might test, but it's very expensive to test for Delta, even the basic antibodies, not to mention, of course, the PCR. So I think the diagnostics, it's still a big problem in Egypt as much as it is everywhere else. And I think point of care testing might make all sense. But I would like to add, not only for Egypt, but for Africa as well, the problem, and I think that's global as well, we don't know the situation in the pediatric population. We're missing data in the pediatric population, very few case reports on Delta in children, and even on mother-to-child transmission. When the mother is co-infected with Delta, there are few case reports on transmission of Delta through mother-to-child transmission. So I think also we need to consider women of childbearing age to be targeted for testing for Delta, because they might transmit their infections to their children even after birth. So that's one point I think we've missed here. And we need to collect better data and collect more data on the pediatric population, and even on adolescents if we're contemplating in the future treating those populations. I don't know if Pietro can answer a question on when we can predict Bulevirtide to be available for adolescents or the pediatric population. I haven't heard about any clinical trials ongoing for antiviral therapy. And I don't think it's not available in North Africa as well, and it will not be available, I don't think, in the near future unless we have clear data. Thank you.
Maura, if I may, before giving the word to Stefan that can comment on a few of the issues we were discussing, there are a couple of questions that I would like to, if we have time, to transmit to the panel at the very end. One is important, but that can be answered by Pietro at the same time as the pediatric situation. Is there, or even the other people in the panel, is there any plan to have a kind of discount access to Bulevirtide out of the regions, the EMEA region, or when there will be the approval in the US? In the US, is there any plan, any discussion in your? This was one question from one of the chat active person that I think is very important. There is any discussion? You are in all these.
Yeah, Massimo, you know, I'm not part of the company, so I'm not a representative of Gilead Sciences, so I cannot make any statement on this. What I can tell you, what we know, is that the company, to my knowledge, has been in the past for other drugs, they were able to provide a discounted product in different areas, including Africa and Asia. So possibly in the future, I don't know. Going back to the question on pediatrics, I'm not aware of any study on pediatrics and Delta and adolescents with Bulevirtide for now. But I'm sure there will be some studies, but not now.
Stefan. Your comments on what was being said, and Einer can eventually later, if he knows something more about Bulevirtide availability worldwide, he can step in at the end.
maybe also I cannot speak for the company. Of course, everyone is hoping that there are compassionate use programs. There are some compassionate use programs going on, but that will not solve the problem that we are discussing here. Yeah? I mean, you will have, at least if you give out the possibility to produce that drug in other countries. I mean, it's a little bit a complicated drug, so I don't think that every country can do that. And we will see whether that works. I personally hope that, of course, because this is a drug for those that are living in the poorer countries and mostly, yeah. Maybe regarding the essay, what I was just, I mean, Nara was visiting us in Heidelberg just last week, yeah, and we were discussing exactly these kind of things. I think it will be very important at the end to have a point of care for both, for S-antigen and for anti-delta. And it works in principle. We've shown that in the paper that has been presented by Fabien. We are developing that point of care assay at the moment. We are trying to get that CE certified and get approval. This is on the way. It's not yet there. It is published. There's another publication also where we've done some of the work in China. We think that it is very helpful. But we discussed something I personally find interesting and where we can start. In Mongolia, obviously, half of the population has already been screened for S-antigen, as far as I understood Nara correctly, or at least a part of the population, or a bigger part of the population. So we could manage to make an ELISA there with this antigen that we produce. So if we could manage to give that antigen out, yeah, for free in those countries where it's needed, where there's no profit delivery of antigen, we could even manage to produce that stuff in a laboratory for screening 200,000 samples that are already there. So I think with an effort, when a government would realize that there's a problem, and I thought that this was a problem in Mongolia, that the government just didn't realize with this limited data that there is a real problem. So we need to have a kind of coalition, maybe even ICE-HBV, yeah? One that provides the method, some foundations that put some money in, a willingness of a government to support something like that. We can make something that could start like something in HCV for Egypt, with screening the whole country in Mongolia. And then we at least have that. And then we can continuously continue with these kind of efforts. Of course, we need support, and we need all people working together in a kind of, for the poorer countries, non-profit way, yeah, to manage that. But it's, I think, manageable. And meanwhile, of course, this will be different from country to country. When you have to start to screen from the scratch without knowing anything on HBV or HBS antigen, that will be more problematic. But we could start, for example, with Mongolia and with other countries like Pakistan, where there are already data available. That's what we should focus our efforts, or bundle our efforts, all that we have, and try to get that done. I mean, we are ready to do that, and we are starting something with Nara in Mongolia. That's what I can say now. Maybe a little bit hope, maybe a little bit too much enthusiasm. Many of you have already been frustrated by some other things, but we can do something. I think so. I'm positive. And we need the companies that then deliver the drugs. It would be very bad to have the whole population screened, all the patients ready, and no drug available.
This is certainly an important point. It is important to screen, otherwise we cannot realize where the problems really are, the entity of the problem, but then it's becoming the effort to achieve better measurement, better assay, more affordable assay. That's what the main point that we are talking here. And then, of course, the drug, because even with Bulevirtide, we still don't know. There was also a question in the chat, a comment, what do we need about sustained response? What do we need when to stop? This is a very, very difficult issue as well. So we need to do more and to develop further drugs as well, I think.
I think that's a very important point. Maybe, sorry to be so dominant, but to add that. With the HCV, we had a limited treatment time. And it's easier for a company to say, okay, we give the drug for when I know when to stop and I've cured the disease. If I need 3 years and may cure, this would also be good. We don't know that yet for Bulevirtide. There are indications, as we've learned, yeah. But an important point that we should do is to accelerate to getting to the primary endpoint so that we can stop earlier. That's what also Pietro mentioned. If we have predictors that say we can treat for 1 year and we need for an entry inhibitor at least 1 year, even if we accelerate that, for 1 year, then we may have the chance to also improve public health measures, because companies are more willing probably to give that drug for compassionate use programs if they don't need to continue.
And then we're back to the problem of patient stratifications. Maybe Heiner, you want to make a short comment?
Yeah, I think there's nothing to add. Everything has been mentioned. I just want to highlight the to me, really critical issues of ethics of testing. So if you identify patients, if you cannot offer anything, then I have a problem in rolling out broad screening programs. You find arguments still if the patient knows he may behave differently, screening, etc. But we need to offer something. Yes, we have interferon. And we should not forget interferon, even in settings where bulevirtide is not available, because this has been associated with an improved clinical long-term outcome. And that's what I really have to highlight. Therefore, I strongly support testing, even in the absence of availability of bulevirtide. But all the other issues have been mentioned. I just checked clinicaltrials.gov. At least there is no trial in children listed yet. So that's all I can say.
Thank you. Nara, small comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the point Heiner was making. So it's in some ways, it's absolutely true. We have to offer something in order to have, identify patients, tell them that you have really terrible disease, and then you don't do anything about it. This is not great. But on the other hand, our experience has been that in a country like Mongolia, actually screening and getting people identified and then being able to push the government to do things, allocate money to do it, to it. It's also quite important. For hepatitis C, for example, we had for a long time peg interferon, etc., DAA coming out. We already had in the country, at least from our study, we estimated 150,000 people with the C living in Mongolia, but government was not willing to do anything. But whereas the patients, they actually show, okay, I have this disease. I can see if I go to somewhere else, get cured, then the government actually, despite being low middle income country, it was able to bring out money. It's about priority in a way. So I think this is kind of, you should not be too much limited about screening. I think getting to know the problem, and also patients are, when they know their status, they are not going to do stupid things like, I don't know, drinking too much vodka or things like that. So it actually improves the patient outcome in a way. So at the moment we are, despite we don't have any drug, Bulevirtide, I think in terms of the access pricing, we've been discussing with Gilead for a really long time, but not a lot of things happening there. There has been a lot of discussions about what price point Mongolian patients might accept. So I think probably Gilead has spent a lot more money to find that out than treating patients in a way at the moment. That's how, as a clinician, I feel. But the thing is that at least what we can do is that patients, if they can take care of themselves better, like not having NAFLD on top of that, not having the alcoholic disease and all that, that sort of things actually improves the outcome. And then the other very important point in Mongolia is that if the patients are in care, they know they have the disease, they can get diagnosed early for the liver cancer. So that's one of the points that we see quite important.
Okay, thank you very much, Anna. I just remind you that we are behind the time planned, but yeah. Okay,
just a quick point.
Very quick.
Just a quick point. It's a catch-22. It's a catch-22.
You're back. Okay.
It's a catch-22. If we don't have data for the prevalence of something, the governments will say to you, well, we don't have a problem. So, you need to screen to show that we have a problem in order to ask for the antiviral therapy, so it is a bit difficult. ethically, on the one hand, you can't screen and not treat. On the other hand, you can't convince the governments that you've got a problem if you don't screen.
That's true. And earlier and more frequent screening might also be very helpful to do something. I try to avoid further aggravation of the problems. But I think we agree, and we unfortunately will need to close this very exciting session, I think. So if there are not very, very urgent comments, I hope you managed to answer something in the chat. We'll try to catch up somehow. And I would say, just to remind you at the end, everybody, that the material will be posted both at the Global Health Organization, ICE-HBV, so stay informed also for future, for the next webinar and other many different initiatives.